talk to you about that you have issued from Rights Probe. You're not just a member of Rights Probe, you're an author and researcher and professor. And I want to talk about something that I think is not being sufficiently covered across the country. And I know it's really started to shock British Columbians who have been sort of woken up, who were sleepwalking past this. Let me read the headline of a recent essay you wrote. Courts and governments caused BC's property crisis. They're not about to fix it. And I'll just read the first sentence just so people know what we're talking about, and then I'll hand it over to you. You said,
right.
In British Columbia, property rights are in turmoil. The BC Supreme Court recently declared that Aboriginal title exists on 800 acres of land in Richmond, a suburb of Vancouver. Aboriginal title, said the court, is, quote, senior and prior, unquote, to fee simple interest. In the shadow of the decision, given the implications, Aboriginal title claims are receiving more attention. Kamloops and Sun Peaks Ski Resort are targets in one such claim. Meanwhile, the BC government has been conferring Aboriginal title across the province too. It continues to make agreements, such as on Haida Gwaii, to transfer control over land use in the province. That has totally spooked people. Richmond, by the way, demographically, there's a lot of new Canadians there, a lot of Chinese-speaking Canadians, and this is it was very interesting to me to see new political fault lines there. People are shocked that the house they worked their whole, for a lot of people, their house is their total life savings. And now they're being told, well, you don't even own the land under it. Terrifying. Take it away, Professor.
Right. But you see, this is a consequence of bad ideas that have been with us for a while. They're coming home to roost now, and people are surprised because they weren't at the surface before. But they really shouldn't have been surprised if they've been paying attention. One of those bad ideas is that the law should be different for people of different races and backgrounds and cultures and lineage.
Right.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah.
And the second bad idea, and there are lots of them, but the second bad idea is that governments and courts have the power to decide what's proper with respect to your property. Your property in Canada has never been secure. It's more insecure now than it's ever been. But our property has always been held subject to the Crown. The Crown, our governments have always had the power to expropriate property and to compensate you. Well, our statutes say they must compensate you, but they have always been able to legislate your property away if they have chosen to do so. They've just mostly chosen not to do so, but we are now in an era where the idea that Aboriginal groups have essentially the right to claim any territory that they've ever occupied or used or can show through oral evidence that they have a claim to. And that is undermining the security of property, especially in BC, because BC is largely unceded, so to speak, without treaties. But is not the only area by any means. There are lots of land claims around in Ontario and New Brunswick and in Quebec and so on. So people should not be satisfied by the claim that this is a BC problem. It's not, but it's especially acute in BC. And as you alluded to, this decision, the Cowichan decision relating to Richmond, has declared Aboriginal title to be senior and prior to fee simple interest. Now, the New Brunswick Court of Appeal recently, with respect to a New Brunswick land claim, basically came out and said, well, not quite so fast. Aboriginal title is not able to supplant fee simple interest, but a claim for compensation can be made against the Crown, which is better, but it's still not a full answer, because any claim against the Crown for a huge swath of land, of course, is going to be paid for by tax dollars, meaning the residents will pay one way or the other, right? So the foundational problem is this idea that if you have a certain kind of descent, then you are a different legal category than everybody else. And that is the idea that in this country we have to do away with.
You know, I go to the UK quite a bit because I'm riveted by their debates over immigration. And one of the things that the establishment always says is we can't stop the boats because why? Because of the European Convention on human rights. Even though the UK left the European Union in a Brexit vote a dozen years ago, 10 years ago, they still stayed in this legal, superstructure, riveted on top of, you've got centuries of British law, which many would say is the finest source of liberty of any legal system. I mean, that's what we inherited, that's what the Americans inherited. They've got their problems, but they've been thinking about freedom since the Magna Carta. They've riveted onto that, this European law, and they say, oh, what can we do? It's a foreign law, and we have to abide by it because we're part of the convention. Well, get out of it is the short answer. I think there's something similar here in Canada, but we never were in it as officially as, like, everyone in the UK knows they were in the European Union. In Canada, we have something called UNDRIP, which immediately puts everyone to sleep because what's that? It sounds like a leaky faucet or something. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And even that, it's so foggy and I'm worried people are turning off our show right now because they're so bored by it. But that's the trouble with it. We've signed on to this treaty that was not drafted by Canadians in our parliament. We agreed to something that bureaucrats cooked up at the UN. I bet you not 1 in 1,000 Canadians has read it. Let me change that. Not 1 in 100,000 Canadians. Not 1 in 100 journalists. Not you think there's more than 1 in 100 MPs who have read it? And yet that is the fountain of so much of this communist property rights destroying ideas. Why don't you talk about UNDRIP? What is it? Where did it come from? How do we get out of it? What does it say? I think it's like this eternal excuse in the UK. Sorry, we can't do anything about it because we're part of this foreign treaty.
Right. So I'll go into UNDRIP, but let me just observe first that these are all tools. The European Convention on Human Rights, UNDRIP, all kinds of other things are tools. And part of the thing that we are doing, those of us who oppose all of this, are playing a bit of whack-a-mole. Right? There's this and there's that and there's the next thing, and we're quite right to point out all these issues that arise coming down the pike like never before, but they're all of a piece, right? So UNDRIP is part of the piece, and UNDRIP is a UN General Assembly resolution that lists pages and pages and pages of rights and entitlements for indigenous groups. Now, as a UN General Assembly resolution that is not binding, it's not a treaty, it's certainly not a law.
It's a declaration. It's like a press release. It's a press release.
It's like a press release. It's an aspirational document put together largely by countries that don't have, quote, Aboriginal peoples in the first place, right? But what happened after that is important. So at the time that UNDRIP appeared, the Stephen Harper government voted no, along with the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, and so on. And that position was reversed when the Trudeau Liberals came into power. But that still wouldn't have changed anything, except for the fact that in 2019, the BC legislature passed a statute saying that the BC government was responsible for making sure that BC laws were consistent with the declaration. And so one of the things that the declaration says is essentially that Aboriginal peoples have the right to the territory that they ever occupied or used. It says that in black and white. Yeah. And so what's happened since then is that the BC government, the NDP government, has taken that as a literal mandate to go ahead and make agreements with various groups for various territories, either acknowledging Aboriginal title or handing over management rights. And also recently what has happened is the BC Court of Appeal has said, actually, yes, that's what it means. This means this statute, DRIPA, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, the BC statute. The effect of that statute is to incorporate UNDRIP into British Columbian law. And it means that the government has an obligation to do these things. So this is a self-made problem. It's a self-inflicted problem. It's part of the sort of the cultural suicide of the West. This happens to be a British Columbia instance, but you mentioned what was happening in Great Britain. It's happening all over the place. And it is a function of the fact that our leaders have the power to make decisions, make policy decisions in the general welfare, to do things that they shouldn't have the power to do.